In my last video, I talked about the adverse effect that AI is having on prices for hardware across the board and, in turn, gaming hardware. The video right here is titled, "Prices Are About to Get Ugly, Console/PC Prices Expected to Skyrocket as AI Causes Massive DRAM Shortage and Inflation." And this video is a follow-up on that's going to cover two things. One, just how screwed Xbox might be if reports are true about how unprepared they are when it comes to the situation. And two, what kickstarted all of this and what was the leading cause behind this DRAM shortage and inflation and how bad it's going to get. And I've already briefly touched upon this in my last video discussing how AI is just taking up a lot of the bandwidth of DRAM manufacturing and distribution because AI just requires a ton of RAM for their servers and whatnot. But recent reports may have provided further insight that really paint a full picture of what's going on and how bad this is. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen DRAM prices utterly skyrocket, with reports back in November 4th citing how DRAM prices are now 171% more year over year than they were before, outpacing the price increase of gold even. And it is expected that during 2026, there will be a severe shortage of DRAM. Just a little over a week ago, on November 16th, 2025, we saw reports that Samsung is planning to increase the prices of their RAM by significant margins, anywhere between 30 to 60%. And that was back then. Those prices may be going up even further with the ongoing situation. And then another ripple effect of that is that GPU prices will likely go up, with AMD in particular reacting to memory price increases by planning to increase prices for GPUs. GDDR6 using graphics cards has also seen increases of around 30% as foundries and memory vendors shift capacity towards server DDR5, HBM, and AI products. Now, back then, those were just reports. As of today, that has become a reality, with AMD having announced plans to raise GPU prices by at least 10%, notifying partners including Asus, Gigabyte, and PowerColor due to ongoing situations surrounding DRAM shortage and inflation. So yeah, price increases are coming for GPUs, and what that means is that people will be hoarding GPUs, and so supply for GPU will significantly decrease while demand for GPU will significantly increase, and what that means is that GPU prices will eventually skyrocket as well. And you have tons of people talking about this on social media, discussing how AI has ruined the entire technological economy, with RAM kits now being 180% more expensive, GPUs being next. We got this individual highlighting how certain RAM kits have gone from $150 to $500 in less than 2 months. And hell, I mean, if you go to Amazon right now, you can see that RAM kits like this one, 64 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM, are going for as much as $1,200, $1,220 to be precise. And looking at the price history here, you can basically see that prices have, tripled, quadrupled even. The same user puts it aptly here, RAM prices have as much as quintupled in just 2 months. A PS5 Pro is now cheaper than frickin' DRAM. Basically, anything that uses RAM, from PCs to gaming consoles like Nintendo Switches and PlayStations and Xboxes, will eventually be impacted by all of this. But especially screwed, if again reports are to be believed, is Xbox, with how unprepared they are for this situation. And then beyond that, just in the long term, the computer industry as a whole needs to brace itself for some very rough tidings ahead. And it all starts with the market instability that OpenAI permeated with recent deals that they made with certain companies. Now, while we're on the topic of stability, that brings us to the sponsor of today's video, FlexiSpot, makers of stable, sturdy, high-quality, height-adjustable standing desks. What I've got for you right here is this gorgeous 71 by 35-inch dark bamboo E7 Pro model, which is perfect for someone like me who likes to work and game on a large surface area that is also sturdy and secure. With its dual motor 3-stage semi-sea leg structure, this table is practically wobble-free, with a huge range when it comes to height adjustability, as low as 25 inches and all the way up to 50.6 inches, being able to smoothly and steadily adjust height with up to 440 pounds of weight sitting on top. And it's all implemented very intuitively with this keypad that allows for versatile fine-tuning. You can fully customize your desk's vertical length based on your own height, posture, wrist position, and general comfort, as well as switch between a sitting stance and a standing stance for a wide variety of gaming and work-related use cases, made all the more convenient by the keypad's ability to save 4 programmable height presets. This desk is also great for those who favor being neat and tidy, thanks to cable management trays and compartments it arrives with. A perfect pairing for their standing desks are FlexiSpot's high-quality ergonomic chairs, like the C7 Max here, which offers all kinds of adjustment options to further enhance your desk usage and seated positions, with a lot of considerations for your comfort and posture, making it perfect for comfortable, long-term office work and gaming. FlexiSpot also gives you a wide variety of options for standing desks and ergonomic chairs with various price points, color schemes, wood types, and materials that lets you choose something that suits your budget, needs, and preferences. All of this comes at more affordable prices compared to other brands, and the value gets even better with the Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale going on right now, where you can get up to 80% off and even a chance for some orders to be 100% free. You can take advantage of this deal right now by going to FlexiSpot.com, and if you use my code YTE730, you can get an extra $30 off your order. And all of that comes with a 15-year warranty and a 30-day risk-free return service. All right, so let's begin by talking about the Xbox side of things, and then go a little broader with what's going on here. So for those who don't know, manufacturers of computing devices like PCs and gaming consoles will often have a huge stock of RAM kind of as a safety stock in order to make sure that when situations like these happen, they have like a stockpile, like a war chest of RAM to draw from. But according to content creator Moore's Law is Dead, who is in communication with a lot of sources who are communicating with him about everything that's going on behind the scenes and what's caused all of this and what's going on with companies and how they're freaking out behind the scenes. With Xbox in particular, they're in a unique position where among the big three gaming companies, the big three publishers and hardware makers of traditional consoles, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo, Xbox is currently the least prepared and therefore the most likely to see a price increase much sooner than the other two. And keep in mind that Xbox has already seen 2 price increases, so a third one will be devastating for a platform whose price points for hardware and software and subscription already at an all-time high and way too much. So here's what Moore's Law is Dead had to say about Xbox based on what sources relate to him.
Oh, and one more product to add to this tier list, the A tier, Xbox. Yep. They didn't plan ahead at all, apparently. If you still want an Xbox for some reason at their current pricing, those prices could go up soon or supply could just entirely dry up because multiple sources of mine have apparently been warned by sales reps at Microsoft that this is going to affect the Xbox Series consoles very, very soon, sooner rather than later. But PlayStation is not in the same tier. We'll get to them in a second.
So what he did in this video is basically did a tier list of which companies are the most screwed by this whole DRAM shortage and inflation situation, who are the ones caught with their pants down, and who are the ones who are actually ready to weather out the storm. And Xbox is at A tier when it comes to companies least prepared, when it comes to companies most caught with their pants down. And what it basically comes down to is that whereas a lot of other companies bought out huge stocks of RAM before this all happened and have a war chest of RAM, Xbox seemingly just, didn't prepare for this potential happenstance. And as a result of the RAM shortage and it being too late for them to stockpile and build up that war chest of RAM, what they're forced to do is buy RAM anew, RAM that currently have jacked up prices as a result of the shortage and inflation. So Microsoft will either stop making new Xbox units or they will jack up prices for new units that are created after this whole situation started. And no matter which way Xbox goes, it's a very bad situation, given that the console is already not selling particularly well. It is dead last place when it comes to the big three traditional consoles. The price is already, exceedingly more than the competition, and this is only going to make the Xbox ecosystem be that much less appealing and that much less accessible and affordable. Now, moving on from that, let's talk about the situation on a broader scale and how this all started, how this has screwed over companies, how this has screwed over consumers, and where it all originated. And as I said before, it all begins with OpenAI, whose CEO is Sam Altman. And all of this, by the way, comes from this Moore's Law is Dead video that I think a lot of people should watch. All of the information is based on what sources have relayed to Moore's Law is Dead, so this is secondhand information, but Moore's Law is Dead has a pretty good track record, and a lot of what he's saying makes a lot of sense. So what I'm going to do in this video is kind of summarize that information for you in a hopefully digestible way so you kind of get a good idea of what's happening, what originated this, and what's coming ahead. So OpenAI, obviously it is an AI company, And what's been happening lately is that a lot of other companies have been catching up and gaining a lot of ground in the AI space. Competition was getting really stiff. And so to combat competition, what OpenAI did as part of their Stargate project is make deals with two major RAM companies, Samsung and SK Hynix, deals that essentially guarantee that OpenAI will get a certain amount of RAM from both of these companies, except when you combine these two deals together, what you're looking at is OpenAI getting 40% of the global DRAM output. All of the DRAM in the world, OpenAI is getting 40% from these two massive deals that they made. Now, the thing is that Samsung and SK Hynix didn't know that the other was also making a similar massive deal when it comes to RAM. They didn't realize there was somebody else out there who was also going to give a huge amount of RAM to OpenAI. And so neither Samsung or SK Hynix were prepared for the level of disruption that these deals would cause. And so when other AI companies and electronics companies and, computer makers and whatnot saw what a huge volume of RAM OpenAI was about to hoard up, they all panicked and they themselves started hoarding up RAM. They saw how massive this deal was and figured that in order to kind of continue to compete with OpenAI, they too have to hoard RAM. And so thus began a mass hoarding of DRAM on the part of myriad companies, especially AI companies. And then when other types of companies saw what was going on here with this mass hoarding of RAM, they too felt the need to hoard RAM because they saw that all the RAM was disappearing. And so this created this domino effect of everyone saying we need to get all the RAM we can right now. And then on top of all that, the cherry on top is that safety stock of RAM across the board has been at historic lows due to ongoing economic conditions. Things like tariffs and whatnot made it financially unsafe to hoard up a lot of RAM because prices for those just kept fluctuating based on all the chaotic elements in the current economy. And not to mention that before this whole fiasco, the trend was that RAM was getting cheaper and cheaper month by month. And so, why buy a huge stock now when you can buy it for cheaper later? And so companies were biding their time before they, hoarded up RAM, and they just didn't feel the need to because nobody saw any of this coming. So yeah, the combination of all of these elements is what has led to the current DRAM shortage, just mass hoarding on the part of corporations as a result of what OpenAI kickstarted by making these two massive deals that hoarded up 40% of the global DRAM output. And then on the consumer level, when enthusiasts started to hear about what's going on with RAM, the consumers started to buy up all the RAM. And then there came a point where supply was so low and demand was so high that prices, quadrupled, quintupled, you name it. And who knows how much more expensive they're going to get over the course of the next few weeks and months. Moore's Law is dead even speculates that OpenAI did all of this deliberately and on purpose. They knew exactly what they were doing, but they did it because they wanted to starve the competition because they knew that they were starting to fall behind. And so the desperate tactic that they took was to buy up as much RAM as possible so that the competition doesn't have as much. There are articles indicating that OpenAI even bought out what are called undiced wafers, which are basically unfinished RAM. So the fact that OpenAI is even buying that stuff and hoarding that stuff, when it's kind of useless in their current state, just indicates that they really want to erase any possibility of the competition being able to catch up and being able to have the materials necessary to create the servers and the components and the machinery and the systems that will allow them to catch up and maybe even surpass OpenAI. And so what this brings us to is the current situation where prices are ridiculously high for RAM, like historic highs. Or we're seeing, RAM supply be so low that when people purchase them, retailers might not be able to fulfill those orders until, frickin' December of 2026 is some of the rumblings that Moore's Law is dead has heard about. Because demand is so high now, everyone's hoarding RAM so much that retailers can only distribute so much RAM to so many people because they only have so much supply. Moore's Law Z has even heard about situations where RAM sellers have reached out to retailers trying to see if they can buy back the RAM that they've sold to retailers because they need to sell that RAM to other major clients. So what it basically comes down to is that in their greed, in their avarice, and in their desperation, OpenAI was more than willing to fuck over everyone. The competitors, the consumers, just the market as a whole, if it meant getting a competitive edge. And then that brings us to the tier list that Moore's Law is Dead came up with based on everything he's heard from his sources. S tier being just RAM companies. Obviously, they're completely fucked. I mean, that's the whole reason why any of this is happening. And then on the A tier is Xbox, who just, they didn't prepare at all. They don't have like a war chest of RAM with which they can ride this out for a couple of weeks or months. But on top of that, you've apparently got SSD companies who are on the A tier of companies who are most screwed by this. You've got smaller pre-built PC companies who, just are screwed due to the fact that buying RAM, acquiring RAM to build those pre-built PCs is just so exorbitantly expensive. And then you've got companies like AMD, and we recently saw reports that AMD is planning to increase prices for their GPUs, whereas with NVIDIA, on the other hand, we have not seen reports of NVIDIA planning to jack up prices for their own components, for their own chips like GPUs. And basically the reason for that is that NVIDIA has just a larger safety stock. They were prepared for all of this, so they're just significantly more safe in the short term. That's why Moore's Law Z placed NVIDIA in the B tier of companies who are screwed by this, whereas AMD is in the A tier because AMD doesn't have that level of safety stock to be able to weather out this storm in the kind of short to mid-term. We will likely see AMD run out of RAM sooner than NVIDIA because their war chest is smaller, and so AMD will likely increase the prices for their GPUs sooner. NVIDIA is not completely safe from this whole situation, mind you. Eventually, their prices will have to go up because eventually they'll run out of, RAM from their safety stock, from their RAM war chest, but NVIDIA just has more of a stockpile to be able to ride this out. Now, Moore's Law is dead didn't mention Nintendo, but I imagine that because Nintendo is partnered with NVIDIA, there is some safety that Nintendo has in being able to procure the components that they need to create Switch 2s. But at the same time, all of this combined with the tariff situation, I would not be shocked if eventually Nintendo also increased their prices. Though if reports are to be believed, we'll likely see Xbox increase their prices much sooner because they're so unprepared for this. And then on the C tier of companies who are most screwed by this, you've got mega corporations who specialize in, phones and laptops and whatnot. Moore's Law is that talked about how giant companies like HP usually do negotiate huge deals because, there's such high demand on their part. And so they do have huge safety stocks, but even that safety stock is bound to eventually run out, just not as soon as some of these other companies in higher tiers of this tier list. It is predicted that by mid next year, even companies like HP will eventually run out of stock and will have to jack up prices. Now, I've talked about Xbox and speculated a little bit on Nintendo. We haven't talked about PlayStation yet, and that's because they're sitting a little more comfortably in the D tier of companies most screwed by this. They're among the least screwed companies by this because apparently Sony, unlike Xbox, planned way ahead, buying up a ton of RAM before all of this hit, buying up a ton of GDDR6. So they have this huge war chest that will allow them to ride this out for months. Not to say that prices won't go up eventually, but they have a comfortable enough stockpile that even right now they have a Black Friday sale going on where they're pricing their PS5 family of consoles by $100 less. Given the safety net that PlayStation has right now, they may very well be the last ones of the big three, or among the last at least, to increase prices for their consoles. And then when it comes to the Steam machine, that is something that Moore's Law is dead wasn't able to get much information on from insider sources. It's hard to say if Valve were well prepared for this and have a huge stockpile and a huge safety stock and war chest of RAM, or if they're facing a situation where they were not prepared enough and may have to sell either more limited quantities of Steam machine at reasonable price points, or if they will have to jack up prices to compensate for this whole situation. It's worth highlighting that any computing devices that have RAM in them, yeah, this is wild, and it's somewhat reminiscent of COVID when everyone panicked and bought up all the freaking toilet paper, and there was a massive toilet paper shortage and prices of toilet paper went up. It's kind of like that, but for DRAM and on this huge grand scale that has led components that are typically very affordable to purchase skyrocket in price to the point where they're inaccessible, and upgrading your PCs is going to be just a lot more financially precarious. And then for companies, creating computing devices is going to be a lot more financially precarious. And all of this ultimately originates from one company, one CEO's massive greed, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, who pulled this move that fucked over everyone because he was afraid of competition catching up to him. Or at the very least, that's what Moore's Law is Dead is reporting. At the very least, that's what sources from behind the scenes have relayed to him. But, I'm going to keep an eye on this situation and keep reporting as more information becomes clearer. But for right now, just brace yourselves for impact because massive inflation for computing devices is coming, and it will trickle in one company at a time. But eventually, all companies will have to face the music of this situation unless solutions are put into place to mitigate all of this. But right now, it is not looking great. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is everything you need to know. I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on this whole situation and how you might have been impacted already or may be impacted down the line by this whole situation. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.